Hello and welcome back. My name is Dave and this is Fuzzee Tutorials. Okay, so today I'm going to show you how to do some basic photo editing using DaVinci Resolve. So you can go from this to this, and it's pretty easy to do. So let's get started. Alright, thanks for sticking with me. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to take your photos and export them without losing any data. Now this part of the tutorial is specifically for Mac users, but once we get the photographs into DaVinci, it'll be the same for Windows and Mac. Okay, so let's bring up our photo program, and we're going to pick some photos to work with, so we can take a selection of them here. And now we're not going to edit all these, but I wanted to show you how to do a series of them when you are doing a bunch. So we'll just select the ones that we want. Let's say, grab that one. So we're holding our command key down while we click. Grab that one, and maybe like that one. And now, if we were to just drag them from here, which you can do, you're not going to get the full depth of color in your photo. So to do that, we need to go up to File, and we go down to Export, and then we export Unmodified Original. And we'll leave that turned off. And you've got some choices here. Now I like to use sequential for the simple reason that most of us who have a lot of photos, we don't bother naming them all, and when you bring them out of photos, they're just going to have a really long numbers that are kind of confusing. So by going with sequential, then we can define our front part of the name, and then it will just put numbers in behind with a dash. And so then we go to export, and we're going to pick a location for them and click on the export originals. Okay, so now we can close the Photos program, and we can bring up our Finder, and we can, now because they're numbered sequentially, you don't want to just select them all and drag them in, or it puts them, DaVinci puts them in a, like a slideshow as a single file. So that's not what we want. Now if you're doing a ton of photos, there is a way to drag them all in at once and then get them out inside of DaVinci, but this is just more of a beginning tutorial, so we're not going to get into that. So we're just going to drag them over one at a time here. Here's an old one that I was working with. I'm just going to delete that. And then we can, so you can just drag them in one at a time. Now we're just going to be showing you on the one, so we don't need to drag in the rest. Now what we want to do is we're going to drag this down to the timeline. And then we got to drag it over here to the edge. Okay. Now when you bring photos into DaVinci, it will automatically bring it in as a 5-second video clip, which is fine. That's what we want. And you can shorten it if you like. It doesn't really matter, since we're going to be exporting a single image from inside of a different area. So when you open a new project in DaVinci, you're actually going to come to this window here, and you can drag your photos in there. But we're going to move to the Edit tab. That's just it's a little easier. And once you drag your photos in, by the way, if you don't have your media pool over here, you can just turn it on, off and on from up here. So if you've just installed DaVinci, by default, it's probably going to show up more like this. And the media pool might not even be on in the edit window. So you need to open that up. And if you don't have this left column here, this little button here will turn that off and on. And then if you want to extend it down the left side of the screen, you go up to this little icon here, and that'll pop it down full list for you. And then we can turn on our effects library, and that'll pop in underneath like so. And this is just how I prefer working, but you can set it up however you like. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to go over to our color tab, which is this one right here. We'll click on that. Okay, now let's give you a little quick tour of the interface here. And if you're not that familiar with how photo editing works for color correction and that kind of thing, you might want to check out some other tutorials that better explain exactly what color correction is. We're not going to get into that here. This is for those of you who already know what color correction is about and just want to learn to use DaVinci to do it. So over here where it says lift, this is for adjusting your shadow colors, your darks. And gamma is your mid-range, and gain is your highlights, and then offset will affect the entire photo at once. And here we've got our curves tool, and I'll show you how to use that in a few minutes. And this has some different modes available. So we've got hue versus hue, hue versus saturation, hue versus luminance, and luminance versus saturation, and saturation versus saturation. Now we're just going to be using the curves and the hue versus saturation in this example. If you know what the others are and how to use them, by the time I teach you how to do this, you'll be able to do the rest. And over here in the scopes area, we've got our 3 color channels, and right now it's set to parade, which is the default. Now you can go to waveform, which will show them all combined, and then there are some subsettings of that. So right now it's set to black and white, but we can colorize it. And then you'll see we've got the colors here. And we've also got vector scope. Now this is particularly useful if you're dealing with portraits. The skin color tones will, well, for, let me qualify that statement. For lighter skin tones, it's going to show it on a bar that comes up this way, so that you can tell when you're kind of in the right range. And when you're using the vector scope, you see these squares that kind of go around the middle here. You don't want to have these lines extend out beyond that. But that's kind of a more advanced thing that we we're not going to get into here. And we've got our histogram and our chroma map. So I work pretty much within the parade feature, and the way this works is this is a representation going from left to right of the different color values. So you'll see there's like black on either side of these. That's because this photo doesn't go from edge to edge, because we're working, the video format we're working in is 1080p or standard high definition, and these photos aren't the same aspect ratio. So the thing to watch out for when you're using this is you don't want to have the colors at the top clipping past the top of this. So you want them to actually not quite touch this top line. And the same goes with the bottom. You don't want them to actually touch the bottom. You want them just a hair above. Now, there's a couple of things to remember here. Normally when you first come in here, this number here is going to be set to 1. So you've got your contrast here and your pivot. Now your pivot is basically, what that's referring to is the fall off point, where when you're adjusting color ranges, that's going to be where it's setting your point for above or below. And you'll see how that works in a little bit. Here's your saturation and your hue and your Lumamix. And we're going to talk about Lumamix here in a moment. And then you've also got your color temperature, tint, your mid-range detail, and your color boost. And color boost will work hand in hand with saturation, but they are a little different from each other. And then we've got shadows and highlights. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about here is Lumamix. If you have your Lumamix at default, which is 100%, whenever you make a change to one area, it's going to affect the rest. So if I go to drag this red one here, the red channel, and I move it, you'll see that if you look at what's happening on the right side of the screen in the scopes here, you notice that these will change a little bit in response to what you're changing here. Now sometimes that's good, but not always. And I actually prefer to keep better control. If you want to reset something back to its defaults, you can go down to the letter here below in the for each channel, and you can just double click it and that'll reset it. If you want to reset them all at once, you can use this little icon here, and if you want to reset everything you've been doing, you can do that here. Now, one really nice feature about DaVinci is it uses nodes, so we can actually divide our color correction into several different kind of like levels or sections, and that way if we mess something up, it doesn't mess up everything else. We can just reset that one node. So what we're going to do is create some more nodes. Now there's a couple different ways you can do this. You can right click and go add node, and normally it would be a corrector. But an easier and faster way is if you just hold your Option key down and tap the letter S. Option S will make some new ones, and we're gonna make 4 or 5 of them here, and we're gonna label them. And once again, there's 2 different methods. The one is it's built in, so you can right click and hit your node label. So we're going to call this one Luma. This is where we're going to set our actual luminosity levels. And this one we're going to use for contrast. So you'd right click, node label, contrast. Now I've built my own shortcut by going into advanced settings. So I actually mapped this function into my tab key because it's not used for anything else in color correction. So we're going to name this one Chroma. So that's just the label I use for when I'm adjusting color itself. And then I'm going to be showing you some kind of more advanced stuff here. So we're going to label this one area 1. And this is going to be area 2. Okay, so we're going to start with the Luma, and we're just going to do a basic change of our luminosity levels. Now, it's really neat the way that it's handled here in curves. This line on the left side at the bottom, this is your shadow detail. And if you move it to the right, it darkens. And you notice on the right, on the scopes, you're seeing how it's extending down. So this is where you want to make sure that it's not going down below that line. You want to keep it just slightly above. And if we go up, then it lightens everything, and you see how it compresses the color columns on the right in your scopes. Now the nice thing about this is we can go in and grab any point in the line and make some curves. But you'll also notice here on the highlights, this works the same way here. So you see how it extends the scope levels on the right, and you should go down the side if you want to darken it. So what I'm going to do here is, even though Luma is kind of first, I'm actually going to go into my contrast first. And by the way, we've got Luma mix set to 100 because we want it affecting everything all at once right now. And we're just going to go over to contrast, and we're going to actually decrease our contrast a little bit. We don't want to go too far because we're going to make other adjustments elsewhere. And you notice as I'm adjusting contrast, it's moving the top and the bottom of those scopes at the same time. So we're just going to bring it down to about where you think you've kind of got a good contrast range in there. And don't worry about if stuff looks too dark. We're just looking how it relates to each other right now. And now we'll go back to Luma, and then we can actually do a little bit of brightening up. Or actually, we want to take and lower the bottom part there so it's just above that line. And we're going to do the same up here. I know it seems like we're kind of reversing what we did in contrast, but it does do slightly different things, and it becomes important later. Now we can grab any point on this line, and we can take a particular area and lighten it up. Now you'll notice if I lighten this up enough so that I'm bringing out the detail in the trees, it starts washing out the clouds and the mountains. And if I bring this line back, you know, we can mitigate that to some degree, but it's still, you know, it just doesn't look right. So we're just going to bring this up a little bit but we want to make sure that our clouds still look good, or our sky. So that's where we're going to concentrate first, is the sky, and I'll explain why in a second. So even though you're going to be tempted to try and balance out your shadow detail to bring out the detail in the trees and stuff, we're going to handle that separately. So right now we're going to adjust things until we get the sky looking exactly like we want. And now everything else we've lost the detail on. But that's fine, because now we're going to go to our area 1, and we're going to do an advanced technique here where we're going to mask off a certain area and adjust only that. Now I want to make a little more room to work here, so I'm going to turn off the clips node, and then we're going to we're going to just turn off gallery here for now. So we got a little more room, and now we're going to zoom in just by using the scroll wheel on the mouse. Now I'm using a separate trackball. So unfortunately with the trackpad you don't have the option to use the pinch feature like you can use in other areas. Now you can use your 2 fingers to drag stuff around in that window, which is kind of handy, but you just don't have the pinch feature. So if you don't have a standalone mouse with a scroll wheel, then you can do your zooming up here. And you can also use your Command plus or Command minus to change your zoom levels. Okay, so now that we've got it zoomed in a bit here to work, we're going to go into our, this is called a window or a power window. This is actually our masking control. And I'm just going to actually zoom back out a tiny bit so we've got a little bit of a border, and you'll see why in a second. So we're going to go down here to the pen tool, and we're going to actually draw a little line around everything to separate the sky from the mountains. So we can adjust the bottom part and leave the mountain or the clouds the way we've got them now. So we just have to do this in a series of steps. Now I'm not going to take the time to be super accurate here because this is just a demo, but you just click once and let go, and then move your mouse and click again. And now you can actually come back after the fact and you can move some of these points, and we can even apply some Bezier curves. So if you've got large areas where you need to have a nice curve in there to follow it, you can do that. But you don't have to follow it really precise, because we can actually soften the edge so that it's not a really sharp line where the difference happens. So when you're not exact, it makes it less noticeable. Now I'm just going to fast forward through this so you don't have to watch this painfully slow process. Okay, and then we'll just go, so we're off the edge of the screen here a little bit, and we're going to go down past the bottom of the screen, and then over to the left side again, and back up to our first point. And you'll notice when I touch that or get close to that first point, it turns from the little double-headed arrow to a little circle. So you click and it completes our mask. So now we can go back to our levels here, and now we can grab a point on the line and we can start bringing up our detail. And you'll notice, I'm going to get ridiculous here for a second just so you can see it. You'll notice that it's leaving our sky alone. And we've got a pretty good match on the edges of the mountains, but it's not exact. And you can see that very distinct line there because I've got it at a ridiculous point. So to fix that, we're going to go back. We're just going to leave it there for a second so we can see it, and we're going to go back to our window here, our power window, and we're going to change two things here. We're going to change our softness. So we're going to set that softness to 0.5. And the way I'm changing this is I'm just clicking in the little window and then I'm dragging the mouse to the right or the left. And then we're going to create an inside softness of about 0.25 or so. And same for outside. So now if we go back here, it just softens up that line a bit so it's not quite so harsh. So now when we get down to more reasonable levels here, you can't really notice that there's a line there. Now, if we want to, we could go back and we can actually grab some of these points and move them around a bit. So if I wanted to really zoom in, so we could actually take, now you notice there's two sets of lines here. That's because of the softness with inside and outside that we set. So we can actually take these and we can tighten this up a little bit. And there's actually three sets. One will, the master center one will move them all. And this is our inside softness. So we can just take this. And now we can add more points to this just by clicking on the new area, and it'll add a point right there. So just a little fine tuning. And we can just grab a center point there and pull it in a little bit. So I'm just going to leave it at that. You know, you can mess with it until you get it exactly right for your purposes. But and I'm just using my mouse wheel here and the Option key to get my zoom set where I want it. Okay, so now we can go back to our curves. So we can add more points to this line and make more adjustments if we want. So, and always you need to remember to do just subtle changes. And watch your scopes on the right so they don't get too out of control. So we're just going to brighten those couple of things there. Now, if we try and do too much more adjustment here, we're going to throw too many things out of whack. So this is where some of these other controls come in handy. So I'm going to go back to chroma, and then we're going to switch to hue versus saturation. And as soon as I move over the picture, you'll notice I've got this little eyedropper tool. So we want to isolate just the green. And so if we just hold our mouse button down and we kind of roll over some of the color here, it'll pick up that whole range of green that's right there. And now any changes that we make to the green, it's going to just work within this particular range. And before we do that, we're going to take our Luma mix and we're going to drop it down to 0. Okay, so now we can take just that green and we can move our saturation up. And maybe that's not bright enough for you, so I'm going to actually just bring it back down for a second, and I'm going to go over here, pick my number 2, and I'm going to bump up my color boost a bit so that the saturation changes will have more in effect. So we're just going to bump it up to, say, about 25. And now when we move our saturation, we can start getting that more intense grass green that we want in there. So now I'm going to make another node, so Option S. I'm going to call this, I'm going to call this Chroma 2. And now I'm going to grab some of the color in the trees here. So we're just going to do that. So now we can, now I'm doing it to a kind of an abnormal level just so you can see the differences on YouTube. And normally you're going to do a little more subtle changes. Now if we want to, as opposed to intensifying the color, if we want to brighten it, just brighten it up. If I go over here, I can pop down this list instead of having to go through the dots. So we're going to go Luma versus saturation. And let's make another node. And we'll Luma Sat. Now I can come in here and select again. And now we can take this and we can just brighten that up a little more. And don't worry if the color is looking a little too off. That's fine, because we'll go and turn the intensity of it back down a little bit. And we might move this a little bit more just to bring out some more of that detail. Okay, so now we can go back to our Chroma 2, back to hue versus saturation. We can bring that down just a little bit so it's a little more subtle. So you get the idea. I'm sure many of you out there are a lot better at color correction than I am. I'm just showing you how to use the tools. So now we're going to go to our area 2. And we're going to make a new area to work with here. So if we want to take this highway and brighten up that yellow line and adjust the pavement color. So we'll just go in here, and this is a little easier because we can just draw a pretty straight line. So now we can go back to our curves here. So now if we want to, we can lighten that right up, or we can darken it right down. Whatever we think looks better. This is all personal taste. And you'll notice there's just a little area kind of in the middle over there that's adjusting on the colors. So I'm just going to leave it to what I think looks good. So now we're going to go back to our hue versus saturation. And I'm going to take this yellow line here and just sample a little bit of that. So now we can take and just bump up the intensity of that yellow. Make it look like they're nice freshly painted lines. Or you could even try and fade them down so they're not so noticeable. Okay, so now if we want to just take a look at a before and after, if you are on a particular node and you want to deactivate just that node, you can go Command D. So it'll take away the changes you just made so you can see the difference. And if you want to see what all the changes made, so if you want to disable all of the changes you made, you just go Option D. So we can see. Now I realize that the color corrections we've made here are kind of on the ridiculous level, but that's just because I wanted to show you how you can separate things out and adjust things one at a time. So if we want to go back and select some of the individual nodes and disable just them, we can see what kind of a difference those alone made. And this is why we separate them, because then we can go back and we can get a little more subtle with some things without having to reset the whole thing and start over. So it just gives you kind of a basic introduction. So now what we're going to do is we're going to turn on our gallery. And I'm actually going to get rid of this. That's from a dry run I was doing. So we're just going to remove that. So now is how we're going to export this out to a usable photo without actually doing a render the video and doing frame capture for it. Although that is a way you could do it. So we're just going to go back to our main curve screen here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this and go grab still, and then I'm just going to click on change label and call it edited. Okay, so we're just going to right click on here again, and we're going to go down to export. And we'll just call that mountains. And if you want to choose a specific format, we can go back in here and we can rename it here. And you can go down here to files, and then you can choose a different format. So if you want a more lossless format, we can go with TIFF. And now if we go look in our Finder, you can ignore this DRX file. We can actually just delete that. And there is our edited photograph. And you can see it's a pretty large file size. It's 12 megs, quite a bit bigger than the original. And PNG version is about half that size. And you can export it as a JPEG if you like. Now you'll notice here when we go back and look at it, you can actually see we might have had a little bit too heavy of a softness line. Or if you've got a really exact match, you know, if you take the time to get your match really precise, you could just use a softness of, you know, maybe 0.1 instead of the 0.5. And then the individual inside and outside levels, you could either use just one of those, or, you know, just use a really fine adjustment, or none at all. I mean, you'll have to play with it and see what works best for you. So now if we go back and look at the original, I'll just slide one off screen here a bit. So you can see we made quite a difference. Really brought out some of that detail. Now, one of the whole reasons that I decided to do this tutorial was that I had a friend who is kind of upset with Photoshop and the company Adobe because of how much they're charging for the subscription model. And there are some other free options out there, such as the GIMP, but the GIMP, the controls are nowhere near as intuitive to use as what's in DaVinci. Now, yes, DaVinci is designed for video editing, but I personally think it does an amazing job for basic photo editing once you learn how to use its control system. It's much more intuitive. I find it more intuitive than anything I've ever used. Although, to be fair, I have used the new GIMP, but I haven't used the new Photoshop. The last version of Photoshop I used was back in version 5. And I found it fairly difficult for doing this type of photo correction. Although that said, I didn't really use it a lot for that particular purpose. I used it more for raw graphics design, for web page editing and designing graphical interfaces and that type of thing. I did some pretty high-end stuff in it, but it just wasn't this type of work. But things have changed, and I find that when I do need to edit some photographs, this is what I go to, and this free version of DaVinci is very powerful. So now I could end the video there, and if this is all that you need, then by all means you can stop the video here. But I want to go back to the main edit page and to show you a couple other quick things. As one of the questions that was raised was watermarks. And so if we want to add a watermark, it's really quite simple. If you've already got like a logo to use, like if I wanted to go and use my tutorial channel logo, let me see here. I need the JPEG version or the PNG. And you can use a PNG. That's especially good if you've got something where you've got some gaps in your logo that you want to be transparent. Of course, PNG will maintain that for you. So now that we're back in the edit tab, I can just grab this photo I just brought in and I can bring it over top. And now now we're just going to select that. So it's outlined in red here. And then we can adjust the size to whatever we want. And then move it to where we want. Now I'm doing this just by clicking on the numbers in the position areas. So position X, and then I just go left and right with the mouse. And then Y, if I want to go down, I go left to the minus. Up is right, which gives you the plus. And if this inspector tab isn't open for you, you just go up here and click on inspector. And then if we wanted to draw some text on there, we can just go over here to our effects library. Remember, if it isn't open, we click on that to open it. And then we go to titles. And then we can just go down here to text plus, or you can use the plain text, but text plus has some more features. And we just drag that on top of everything else to a new layer. And then we select that, and then we can go up here to change the text to whatever we want. And then we can come down here to where it says size, and we can either drag the slider, which gives you very quick control. And if you want a finer control, you just go to the box itself, and then it'll move much slower for you. And we can change the color. And we can even adjust the tracking, so we can spread the letters out. If I want to change the font, I can just go to font here. If I want a nice heavy-duty font, a good one that comes built in is Arial Black. If you've got multiple lines, you can adjust your line spacing here. And you can do some fine adjustments with your vertical anchor. Doesn't move very far. And that really kind of has a different purpose that isn't relevant for our purposes here. And there's even animation controls, but that's of course for video. And you can even do some fine adjustment on the individual kerning. If we wanted to rotate the text, we can open the rotation tab, and you can do some neat stuff there. Give a kind of a pseudo 3D effect. So if we wanted to kind of make it look like it was on the road, go back to our main. Oh, sorry. We go to our transform. Okay, so if we want to bring it down so that it's kind of sitting right on the road, we can adjust that rotation a little bit. So in our little paintbrush tab here, and this is where we can go in and we can make some additional changes here. So if we wanted to do some kind of a blurriness, we can set our softness in X and Y. And there's even some extra effects where you can kind of shear the letters. So if we want to like italicize them or that type of thing, you can do that there. So now if we want to put an outline around the text, I can just click on this little outline thing here. And that changes it to an outline. So now we'll just go back. And if I want to add an outline but keep the original solid, I just go where it says select element, and I go to 2, and I enable that. And you notice that this outline thing is now highlighted. And then we can change this to, say, black. And we can adjust the thickness. We can turn it on to outside only. And you can even change the line style. So if we wanted to make it a dashed line or even a dotted line. Now that might be a little hard to see on YouTube. So let's just zoom in a bit so you can see that. And you've got some other options there. You could even do it as a gradient, but we're not going to get into that. And now if we wanted to, for instance, add a drop shadow, we can go back up here and we can go select element 3, and we can enable that. And this is automatically set to being a drop shadow. Now we can, the rest of the numbers 4 through however high it goes, you can go in and make up your own and really get into the advanced features. You can really go down the rabbit hole. So if we want to make our shadow a little lighter, we can decrease the opacity. And we can go down to size. So if we want to increase the size of our shadow, and then we can even change the position of it. So if we just want to make it look like it's like the letters are standing further away, you can just increase your shadow. We've even got a Z offset, which can do some interesting things, like so. So now if we want to combine all this, you can just drag a box around all 3 of these layers, and we can right click and then we can go new compound clip. Name it whatever you want. And now we've got a single clip. And now we have to do this so that we can grab a frame of it back in our color correction here. So now we're going to right click, grab still. Now we'll right click again and export. Maybe this time we'll do it as a JPEG. So call this mountains with text. Now if we go back to our Finder, we'll see we've got our mountains with text. And there we go. Now one final thing that I forgot to show you was when you're doing watermarks, of course, many times you want that watermark to be kind of partially transparent. So I'll quickly show you how to do that. And then, but to do that, we're going to have to actually, we're going to hit Command Z to reverse our compound clip here. And we're going to select our logo. And then we can go up here to where it says opacity. And we can just drop our opacity down. So we can make that fade down to whatever level we want. like so. And then you would just do the same process again. You would select those, new compound clip, name it whatever you want. We'll just leave it default. And then we'll go back to the color tab. And we do the same process. We would just do the right click, grab a still. And then export. With text and watermark. And there you have it. That's the basics of photo editing and adding a few things and getting your photo back out of it. So that's it for this tutorial, folks. I hope you find what we've done today useful. If you do, please click on that like button and make sure to click subscribe. Make sure to use that notification bell so that you get updates when we're putting out new tutorials. So thanks for hanging out with me today. Bye for now.